Welcome to the Working Globally webinar on cultural dimensions. This is part 1 of Module 2 in Working Globally's Intercultural Competency series. If you have ever traveled abroad or worked with colleagues from other cultures, I'm sure you've noticed that they don't always do things the way you would do them, and they don't always act as you expect them to or wish they would. Your colleagues may make decisions differently. They may interact with their managers differently. They may not always do what they seem to say they will. This module explains the beliefs that underpin these different behaviors and discusses how these differences in beliefs often affect the way individuals conduct their business activities. The differences I will describe in this module cannot be seen, heard, smelled, touched, or tasted. So what are they? They are the values and beliefs that our parents and teachers have taught us and that are reinforced every day as we go about our daily lives and our business lives. We accept these values and beliefs as if they are facts, but they are not facts. They are ideas about the world and about how people should interact with one another that most of us assume to be facts because all those around us share these same beliefs. To become interculturally competent, we must learn to accept that these beliefs, which are treated as facts by most people in our own culture, are only our culture's opinions about things that in most cases cannot be proven. Module 1 described the meaning of intercultural competency and presented a framework for becoming interculturally competent. This module presents much of the general knowledge upon which the remaining layers of the intercultural competency framework are built. In this module, I will identify and describe 11 characteristics of cultures, which we will call cultural dimensions. Part 1 will cover 5 cultural dimensions. The remaining 6 cultural dimensions will be covered in Part 2. I will start by describing the attributes of cultural dimensions themselves, how we will use them to predict behaviors and cross-cultural challenges, and the limitations associated with using cultural dimensions for these purposes. Understanding these cultural dimensions is essential for becoming interculturally competent. In our on-site workshops, I will assume you understand each of the 11 cultural dimensions described in this module. They will become our common vocabulary for discussing the challenges you will face and the techniques for overcoming these challenges. For this reason, if as you go through this, there's something that's unclear, please send me an email, ask me a question. Let's try to resolve these issues before we get together for the workshops. Cultural dimensions have the following attributes. The first attribute is they are based on research. They are not anecdotal. They do not represent the experiences of 1 or 2 people. They are based on the answers provided by thousands of people. Second attribute is, in most cases, a cultural dimension is described by 2 opposing beliefs. For example, the best decisions are made by individuals working alone versus the best decisions result from significant debate and do not occur until every stakeholder agrees with the decision. A third attribute is that the beliefs of most cultures lie somewhere between the 2 opposing beliefs, and that where the culture is between the 2 opposing beliefs can be represented by an average value and a normal distribution. Finally, and most importantly, at work and socially, keep in mind that you interact with real individuals who may not be average. This is the most important limitation in using cultural dimensions to predict how individuals from a culture will behave. Cultural dimensions alert us to behaviors we are likely to encounter. The research tells us what the average behavior is and also the likelihood that individuals from a culture will be described by the average. But the important word is likely. Understanding the cultural dimensions of your colleagues' culture helps you to have appropriate expectations and to appropriately interpret what you experience. Nevertheless, one cannot guarantee that the particular individual who is your colleague will actually act as the research predicts. Cultural dimensions are described as opposing beliefs because belief differences are what underlie most cross-cultural challenges. And by identifying belief opposites, we are best able to measure the magnitude of the differences. Let me give some examples. Let's look at 2 beliefs, a U.S. American belief and a Chinese belief. U.S. Americans believe everyone is equal, and they interpret this to mean everyone is capable of becoming a manager. Chinese believe groups that maintain harmony between group members are the most effective at getting things done. While interesting, these discoveries would not help us identify likely differences between U.S. Americans and Chinese, because these beliefs are more like comparing apples to cats than apples to apples. To compare apples to apples, we need to take one of these beliefs, say the Chinese belief that harmony is most important for productivity, and ask, do U.S. Americans also believe this? And if they don't, what do Americans believe that can be measured as a difference between Chinese and U.S. Americans? In this case, the belief opposite to the Chinese belief that harmony is most important for productivity is the belief that constructive conflict is most important for productivity. These two opposites for a single belief give us the possible range for the belief. By considering where cultures lie within this range, we can determine their separation. The average belief of one culture can be compared to the average belief of other cultures, and the distance between these averages provides us with the challenge these cultures will have working with one another. In our example, the average Chinese believes harmony is one of the most important requirements for productivity. Mexicans believe harmony is important, but they do not feel it's quite as important as the Chinese. Polish people, on the other hand, believe that constructive conflict yields the best results. But Polish people do not feel this to the same extent as Germans, who believe that constructive conflict always yields the best results. Let's see how these differences in beliefs result in conflict. In this example, we will consider French and Dutch beliefs. To show how conflicts arise, let's look at the French belief that a fixed hierarchy is required to avoid chaos in an organization, and the Dutch belief that hierarchy stifles creativity and prevents the ad hoc emergence of the most qualified person to lead any specific task. The Dutch believe that a loosey-goosey approach to assigning staff, involving needed people, and sharing information leads to the best results. The tan bell curve represents the Dutch distribution along the loosey-goosey versus hierarchical belief range. The French believe that a rigid, fixed hierarchy leads to the best results. The blue bell curve represents the French distribution along the same belief range. Several things should be noted about these curves. First, there appear to be significant overlap, enough so that you might think the Dutch and French should have no problem working together. In fact, the curves show that some French are even more loosey-goosey than the average Dutch person, and that some Dutch believe more in the benefits of hierarchy than the average Frenchman. But when we consider that these are normal distributions, we see that more than 70% of the Dutch believe in the benefits of a loosey-goosey approach, while more than 70% of the French believe in the goodness of hierarchy. This means that when French and Dutch attempt to work together, there is greater than a 70% probability that the Dutch will find the French annoyingly rigid, bureaucratic, unhelpful, and obstructionist, and the French will find the Dutch chaotic, insubordinate, and insulting. The first cultural dimension we will consider is not a belief range at all. Rather, it is a description of the distribution of certain types of beliefs and the extent of shared experiences across a culture. Cultures that are high context have a narrow distribution of certain types of beliefs, such as appropriate etiquette. In addition, individuals in high context cultures who work together or socialize together tend to share a wide range of social, educational, and business experiences. Historically, high context cultures have been in existence as a single, unaltered, definable culture for a long time, often 1,000 years or more. Invasions of these cultures have been minimal or non-existent, as has immigration. This undiluted consistency has led to commonly understood and accepted beliefs concerning the correct way to interact with others, which we call etiquette. China, France, and Japan meet this criteria, and they're among the highest context cultures. Germany, which has been unified for little more than 150 years, and the U.S., which is made up of immigrants from around the world, are among the lowest context cultures. A second defining attribute of high context cultures is a strong belief in the value, importance, and acceptance of status layers as the natural order of society. We call this an acceptance of power distance. In such cultures, people tend to grow up with, attend school with, and work with others from the same society layer. As a result of these deep and shared experiences, the beliefs, thought patterns, metaphors, and speech patterns within a layer are understood even without being stated. Japan, China, most Romance language cultures fall into this category. English and most Germanic language cultures are the opposite. Individuals from low-context countries can gain an appreciation of the consequences of extensive shared experiences by considering how they communicate with friends they have known since childhood. These special childhood friends know everything about us. As a result, one or two words are often enough to describe complicated situations. Imagine if all those you worked with were childhood friends. This is what life is like in high-context cultures. Individuals in high-context cultures have extensive and important personal, business, and social networks that can be relied upon to provide favors. Sentences packed with meaning can often be short, and to those from other cultures, difficult to interpret. And the rules of proper business and social etiquette are complex and important. Individuals from low-context cultures, in contrast, carefully and unambiguously describe every detail of what they have to say, leaving as little as possible to interpretation. Strong social and business networks tend to be relatively small, and rules of business and social etiquette tend to be few, and while nice to know, violations have little lasting consequence. Because of these differences, who you know in high-context cultures is often more important than what you know. And people from low-context cultures often describe people from high-context cultures as misleading, if not untruthful, while people from high-context cultures often describe people from low-context cultures as rude, talkative, and simplistic. Power distance is the term we will use to describe cultures where the majority of individuals believe people of higher status should be obeyed by people of lower status, simply because of the difference in status. In cultures where this belief is widely accepted, people also tend to believe that status can be inherited. An example would be European kings and queens. Other means of acquiring high status can be attending elite universities or simply becoming old. The person who popularized the term power distance classified cultures as having high or low power distance. In this module, we will call the low power distance end of the power distance range equality. In equality cultures, individuals do not believe that status is important. Rich people or famous people will not be obeyed simply because they are rich or famous, and everyone is considered to have a chance to become rich and famous. All that is needed is ability, hard work, and luck. Some people may be allowed to give instructions, but only if authority has been explicitly given, as in a hierarchy, or when authority has been earned through experience or the demonstration of greater expertise. Where an individual lies between the high power distance and equality extremes of this belief will affect many business behaviors. For example, in meetings, subordinates who believe that people of higher status should be obeyed will not question the opinions of their managers, often not even in private, one-on-one conversations. In fact, they may say nothing at all if their manager is at the meeting. Subordinates who believe that status is unimportant, however, will often question the opinions and even directions of their managers, both in private and in public. Another example concerns decisions. When decisions need to be made, subordinates from high power distance cultures often wait for their manager to make the decisions. For decision making is one of the privileges and responsibilities of those with high status. At least that's what is believed in high power distance cultures. This sometimes gives the illusion that subordinates in some cultures are lazy because they seem to spend considerable time doing nothing. The reality is these subordinates may be very hard workers, but much of their time is spent waiting for their managers to make decisions. In equality cultures, much more decision-making authority is given to subordinates. And just as important, subordinates expect to be allowed to make decisions. We will discuss many other aspects of high power distance inequality in our workshops. People who are impersonal believe to get things done, what you know is more important than who you know. They also believe that emotional trust that is, trusting that someone will do everything in their power to make good on a promise, can be separated from cognitive trust. That is, trusting that someone has the skills and experience required to be able to make good on a promise. Whether or not someone has the ability and expertise required to fulfill a promise can usually be established by references. But how do you establish someone will do everything in their power to fulfill a promise? In impersonal cultures, ironclad contracts are used. These contracts include detailed damages in case of broken promises. In relational cultures, relationships are made and strengthened over time until each party may reasonably expect the other to do everything in their power. In these cultures, breaking a promise can terminate business and social relations forever. Cultures that are impersonal tend also to believe that time is money. Since emotional trust is unnecessary, business relationships can form quickly, even in a single day. If one party to the contract fails to meet their obligations, they will be sued for damages. Individuals with an impersonal orientation often consider nurturing and maintaining or even forming relationships to be less important than other factors, such as contracts, schedules, rules, laws, expertise, and achievement. And because expertise and experience are considered to be more important than personal connections or how well people work together, identifying project tasks is considered more important than selecting individuals when planning projects. Individuals with a strongly personal relational orientation believe that people are happiest and get the most done when they support one another. They believe that most good things come from individuals helping one another, not simply relying on their own ability. They tend to value friends, family, and colleagues over everything else. Consequently, they consider time and action spent maintaining relationships to be extremely important. Individuals with a strongly personal relational orientation often consider forming, nurturing, and maintaining relationships to be more important than other factors, such as contracts, schedules, rules, laws, expertise, and achievement. And because relationships are considered to be as or more important than expertise and experience, identifying who will be part of the project team is considered before identifying project tasks, and is considered to be more important than task identification when planning projects. Where an individual lies between the impersonal and relational extremes will affect many business behaviors. For example, when things need to get done. Impersonal people are less likely than relational people to keep track of and take advantage of an imbalance in favors. Also, impersonal people are less likely to change priorities assigned to daily tasks than relational people are. For strongly relational people, requests from individuals with whom they have strong relationships always get the highest priority, no matter what they're currently working on. We will discuss other effects of impersonal versus relational business behaviors in our workshops. For some cultures, maintaining group harmony is more important than almost anything else. Perhaps cultures developed this belief because breaks in group harmony resulted in revolutions or feuds or other destructive behaviors. Or because, like dancers, they could see that being sensitive to one another led to smoother processes and better results. Making group harmony a number one priority in such an environment would not just keep the peace, but would benefit productivity and the well-being of all. I'm not saying that cultures where harmony is valued above constructive conflict would become chaotic if harmony were lost. I'm just using this as a possible explanation for such a belief. Continuing along this hypothetical, perhaps other cultures discovered that a limited amount of conflict could be tolerated without causing revolutions. These cultures may have seen that limited constructive conflict could result in more inventive solutions to problems. At least the cultures might have believed this. Whatever the reason, some cultures do everything they can to maintain group harmony and avoid actions that would make others look bad or might provoke retaliation, while other cultures encourage constructive conflict in the form of public debate and open discussions. Often cultures that believe constructive conflict is good are described as using direct communication. That is, communication that says exactly what is on the mind of the speaker without any consideration for others. For example, how the communication might make others feel, or if the communication might make others look foolish or ignorant. Cultures that believe harmony is very important are described as using indirect communication. That is communication where the words diplomatically soften the blow, or on the surface hide what the speaker is really thinking. I say on the surface because cultures that value harmony tend to be high context cultures. And as we described earlier in this module, in high context cultures, shared experience enables individuals to understand what the speaker is really thinking, even when the thoughts are hidden by diplomatic language. It should be easy to see that when cultures valuing harmony attempt to work with cultures valuing constructive conflict, many issues are likely to arise concerning decision making, motivation, the running of meetings, and effective communication. We will discuss these and techniques for overcoming these issues during the workshops. While the belief in harmony versus constructive conflict may be one of the major reasons why some cultures use direct and other cultures use indirect communication, several other cultural dimensions may also result in direct or indirect communication. Someone who is risk averse may tend to use ambiguous or diplomatically misleading language for the purpose of lowering the chance that what is said will seem ignorant, incorrect, or out of sync with the rest of the group. In high power distance cultures, someone of lower status is likely to hide their thoughts rather than contradict someone of higher status, and also is likely to be silent rather than indicate the person of higher status failed at something, such as giving clear directions. Someone who is strongly relational may tend to use ambiguous language rather than say something that would make the recipient emotionally uncomfortable. And someone who believes in reciprocity may tend to use ambiguous language or say something diplomatically misleading because they owe the recipient for doing the same previously, or because they would like the other to do the same in the future. The use of indirect communication to maintain harmony can place a heavy burden on speakers, even in high context cultures. In Korea, for example, some Koreans are beginning to complain that trying to assess the emotions of the people they communicate with in order to avoid potential breaks in harmony is leading to more errors in communication than can be sustained in an industrial society. Still, the errors in communication are significantly less between Koreans than between Koreans and other cultures. In Module 2, Part 1 of Working Globally's Intercultural Competency Series, we have discussed half of the foundational information you need to appreciate how culture affects workplace behaviors and begin to understand the important belief differences that cause these differences in behaviors. We've covered a lot of material, so before going on to Part 2, you may want to watch this module again to be sure you remember the terminology. In the workshops, we will use this terminology as we identify and discuss the many behaviors that are considered appropriate by different people from different parts of the world.